What's going on, fam? Welcome back to Impact. We're talking about Spotify and Joe Rogan and the recent podcast in which he had Alex Jones on, which, if you know Alex Jones, he's a famous conspiracy theorist, but he also says a lot of truth in his videos and his content. He's just very boisterous and says a lot of stuff that's very, very fringe over the years, but a lot of his stuff is definitely underblown and he speaks a lot of truth. But of course, if you speak enough nonsense, it's easier to throw everything you say under the guise of under the flag or under the umbrella of, oh, conspiracy theorist. That's just Alex Jones. Not everything he says is wrong, but you know, that's his play, that's his personality, and that's the kind of image that he puts out. But Joe Rogan recently had him on with Tim Dillon on the Joe Rogan Experience, and it's kicked up some more controversy because of Joe Rogan's deal with Spotify and what is actually allowed to be shown and whether or not it would get banned. I think there were some issues with people finding the video on Spotify, but that got corrected pretty quickly. I listened to the podcast and it wasn't that ridiculous. But let's get into this a little bit and see what's going down. Spotify is facing criticism from anti-misinformation groups and its own staff over the appearance of conspiracy theorist Alex Jones on the Joe Rogan show. And I think that's the real issue at hand, its own staff. Is the internal workings of Spotify going to erode these types of deals with these big podcast hosts that Spotify is signing? Now, I think it's a very dangerous precedent if Spotify or any of these other companies signed a deal with a Joe Rogan, for example, and then don't stand behind their content. I mean, Spotify should have known and should know what they're getting into by signing a deal with someone like Joe Rogan. He's going to have on guests that are controversial, but he's also going to hear out all sides of the story. And Joe Rogan obsessively toes the line with not saying anything too offensive, which, you know, for a lot of people, it's really kind of, you know, dampened the excitement or the edginess of his show. But of course, you know, your show is really aggressive and out there and outlandish and, you know, crosses a lot of boundaries, gets a lot of attention. You sign a big deal, you know, it satisfies your hunger a lot and it changes your ability you're not going to put out the same content. I don't care what anyone says, because he's under a deal with Spotify. He's not doing the same exact stuff the same exact way as he would before. And I don't care what he says. It's definitely done with a different lens. He has a bigger deal. Oh, I moved to Texas. It's going to be the same show just on Spotify. It's not the same. It's fundamentally changed whether people notice it or not. There's definitely different filters and things where things go through just objectively. It is what it is, or more moving parts. But it doesn't mean that he's going to heed everything that Spotify says. And apparently, according to Joe Rogan, they haven't said anything to him. He said that the other day on the podcast, that he hasn't listened, he hasn't heard anything. They haven't reached out and said, hey, you have to do things this way. So hopefully internally, Spotify isn't shooting themselves in the foot and they're not giving into the woke ideology that might be trying to infest Spotify. So Rogan's hugely popular podcast signed an exclusivity deal with Spotify earlier this year for $100 million, but Spotify staff have reportedly expressed concerns internally about the appearance of Jones as a guest. Spotify banned Jones' own podcast 2 years ago over hate speech. The tech firm, however, declined to comment about Rogan's broadcast. Over the course of a 3-hour podcast, Jones discussed a range of topics, including how effective mask wearing was against COVID, the risk of vaccines. Mr. Rogan did fact checks of his own during the show, but campaigners are concerned that Jones was given the opportunity to promote inaccurate information about the pandemic to such a large audience. Well, I mean, a lot of major organizations were doing that earlier this year. We learned more information. And of course, just because someone says a lot of things that might be outlandish doesn't mean that some of the things that they say aren't correct. But of course, Alex Jones has a history of being an instigator, to say the least. Quote, they are essentially profiting from the platforming of and giving exposure to the most outrageous and fringe views in the desperate search for ad dollars and subscription revenues. Imran Ahmed, chief executive of the Center of Countering Digital Hate. Okay, hold on. The Center for Countering Digital Hate. This sounds like a reconciliation commission. This sounds like something extremely Orwellian, because how do you define that? That is a phenomenally cynical moral decision to take, said. The Joe Rogan show's exclusivity deal with Spotify will see the show vanish from other platforms at the end of this year, but for now it remains available and extremely popular on other platforms such as Apple Podcasts and on YouTube, but Spotify's payment for the rights to the podcast has stoked internal argument. Bloomberg reports that Spotify staff have taken to the company's internal Slack chat channels to discuss the episode, sharing the internal forums for reporting content and escalating complaints. The internal pushback prompted an email to staff from the company's top legal officer, a copy of which was obtained by BuzzFeed News. Quote, "If a team member has concerns about any piece of content on our platform, you should encourage them to report it to Trust and Safety because they are the experts on our team charged with reviewing content." It continues. However, it's important that they aren't simply flagging a piece of content just because of something they've read online. It's all too common that things are taken out of context. Among a number of talking points about the controversy listed in the email was that we are not going to ban specific individuals from being guests on other people's shows as the episode and show complies with our content policies. YouTube, which still hosts the video version of the interview, said it banned channels but not individual speakers. Quote, "Alex Jones's channel was terminated and he can no longer operate YouTube channels, but he's still allowed to appear in other videos as long as they comply with our community guidelines. We reviewed his latest interview and it does not violate our policies." Responding to the controversy in an Instagram post, Rogan wrote, quote, "I knew people were going to criticize the content of the podcast without even listening, and I was right. He claimed he fact-checked every single crazy thing he said and that all of them were verified." The response was accompanied by a video of Bill Gates being interviewed about a relatively minor side effects suffered by a large proportion of people in a vaccine trial. Quote, "He said a lot of crazy but accurate things, and that's what I've been saying about him for years," Rogan concluded. When the exclusivity deal was announced, Rogan said Spotify would have no editorial control over the podcast. But Mr. Ahmed said that was, quote, "a very familiar tale from the platform that profits from the content, that there's nothing they can do while enjoying all the rewards." So what Mr. Ahmed is saying, that Spotify says, well, we have no control. Legally, we have no control. And that's pretty much plausible deniability, where Spotify can take their public stance that we signed Joe Rogan. It's on, in other words, that Spotify is deflecting to Joe Rogan while maintaining their anti-hate stance maybe publicly, but benefiting from whatever, quote, hate is generated or misinformation is generated on Joe Rogan's podcast, which, one, is probably true. It's smart. It's deniability, and it's protecting vulnerability from Spotify's standpoint, but it also protects the freedom of speech of their big name people. If you want Joe Rogan, you want to build his podcast. You want Joe Rogan's podcast to be successful. If you're Spotify, you're paying $100 million to get more than that in return. Understand? So Spotify is spending big money because they're planning on making more than that. You're not gonna be like, hey, let me spend $1 million and make none. You're spending it with a plan to bring in more people, bring in more subscriptions, to make more than that over the course of a multi-year deal, which is the actual, I don't know how long the deal is, but a multi-year deal in order to build up subscriptions and so forth. So you sign a big person. The decision and the agreement is the agreement. If Joe Rogan has full editorial control, that's the deal. Whether or not it's a good strategy for Spotify, which I think it is, it just is what it is. The thing is, Spotify has to relentlessly stand by Rogan and cannot let this dissension and this ideology within their company. Who cares? If you work for Spotify and you don't like that they signed Joe Rogan, well, you're not an executive. You don't get to make that choice. You can quit. Seriously, these people need to quit. If they don't like it, then quit. Then you shouldn't be working for Spotify. Go work at a supermarket or something. Seriously. You can't control what people say. You should not control what people say. It's not hate speech. It's people's opinions. And a lot of them obviously are proven true. Whether they're coming out of Alex Jones, the truth is the truth. Whether it's coming out of Alex Jones's mouth, Joe Rogan's mouth, or Ahmed's mouth, or whatever his name is. So, I mean, whether you like it or not, yeah, it's someone having a conversation. Let them speak. Let them speak. People want to hear it, obviously. It's got millions of views right away. Why do you think Joe Rogan pulls such a huge audience? Because people want to hear what he has to say and what his guests have to say. And the thing is, censoring speech, if you censor speech, you can't hear it and you can't make proper arguments against it. If you don't agree with something, put it out there and let people openly disagree. You need that kind of discourse. If you can't have that conversation, then how can we have conversations about, Like, we have to be able to say things are BS or not truthful or agree with them. We have to have that conversation, that discourse. And Joe Rogan's podcast is a great place for it. So anyway, what are your thoughts, fam? Drop a comment down below. Thanks for watching. Remember, hit that subscribe button for more videos every day. And check out the other videos here on the channel. Check out the Swolenormous Procast. Check out all the podcasts available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Just type in Swolenormous. You got the Swolenormous audio experience. You got the Daily Swole podcast. You got Red, White, and Swole. And soon you'll be seeing content from the Swolenormous Procast. So make sure you check all of that out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you real soon for the next video.